this evening is a gentleman I'm sure who's probably well known to most people in this room. Gary Vikan was director of the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. He stepped down from that position in March 2013 to write and teach, to pursue projects at the intersection of the arts and sciences, and to provide consulting services to art museums and to dealers. He recently developed an exhibition on neuroscience and art with the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Washington, D.C., and is co-chair of convening on art and science? Yeah, Convention on Art and Science at the Salzburg Global Seminar in Salzburg, Austria, scheduled for February of 2015. Please welcome Gary Vikan.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for coming. I've enjoyed this. I've never done this. Am I nervous?
Yeah.
No. I'm too old. Anyway, thank you very much. This is an adaptation of Chapter 5 of my memoirs, which are all but done, or will be done in the early fall. And I've enjoyed them tremendously. I have no title for the memoirs, but for reasons I can't explain, you can't always get what you wanted. Keeps going through my mind. Anyway, this is called Renoir Girl and the Mysterious Mr. Egret. Most of you probably recall the story that emerged with a big media splash in the late summer of 2012 of Renoir Girl and her flea market Renoir. Raise your hands if you remember that. Do you read the newspapers? Holy Christ. A woman in Northern Virginia who portrayed herself as naive about art and all but destitute claimed to have stumbled upon a tiny, elaborately framed painting at a flea market in West Virginia in late 2009. The work is a sketchy river view in bright pinks and greens and has a metal plaque on the frame with the name Renoir. On the back is a sticker with the work's title, Paysage pour dessin. Renoir Girl claimed she found the painting in a box with a plastic cow and a Paul Bunyan doll, which is what attracted her attention. As her story went, she paid $7 for the lot. You with me? Mm-hmm. Good. Eventually, after apparently forgetting about her purchase for more than 2 years, Renoir Girl decided to check out her flea market Renoir, she says, at the urging of her mother. A regional auction house in Northern Virginia confirmed that what she brought in to show them in a plastic garbage bag was indeed by Renoir, and estimated its auction price at $75,000 to $100,000. They told her that it was painted in 1879 on linen, and that it was likely dashed off by Renoir as a souvenir for his mistress on a napkin in a restaurant where they were dining at the side of the Seine, ergo the title. The auction was scheduled for September 29th, and Renoir Girl was all over the media, from Good Morning America to the Washington Post, whose reporter, Ian Shapira, covered this art world fairy tale in depth. And we all wondered, where did this Renoir come from? Could it have been stolen? Henry Walters didn't like the Impressionists, so this was not an issue for the Walters Art Museum. It was, however, an issue for the Baltimore Museum of Art, specifically because the Virginia auction house traced this particular Renoir back to a gallery in Paris, where it was purchased in 1926 by Philadelphia-born lawyer and collector Herbert L. May. May was then married to a shoe manufacturing heiress, Sadie Alder of Baltimore, who was a major collector of modern art in her own right and who bequeathed most of her substantial collection to the BMA when she died in the spring of 1951. Knowing this, the staff of the BMA checked their files and felt confident as the auction approached that they had no record of such a Renoir ever having been in their collection. Ian Shapira did his own research. He visited the BMA library, requested the Sadie May file, and in it found evidence that Paysage pour dessin was lent by Sadie Mae to the museum in 1937. That revelation prompted the BMA to examine their temporary loan file, where they found that this particular Renoir did indeed belong to Sadie Mae, that it was part of her bequest to the museum, that in the fall of 1951, it was in an exhibition called From Ang to Gauguin, and most important, that it was reported stolen on November 17, 1951. The theft took place between 4 p.m. on November 16th and 1 p.m. on the 17th, and there was no sign of forced entry. End of story for 60 years. Ian Shapiro's revelation, along with BMA follow-up, got full coverage in the Post on Thursday, September 27th. Again, we're in 2012. The auction was canceled and the FBI stepped in and seized the painting. What caught my attention, though, was the date the painting was reported stolen, November 17th, 1951. It took me back more than a quarter century to a mysterious package I received at the Walters on May 1st, 1986. This is true. It was a book mailer, and the return address bore the name Egret, preceded by the initial R in capital letters, each stroke of which was squiggly, as if done by a very old person. Below was 10 Church Street, which I recognized to be an address in Lower Manhattan, and its cancellation marked zip code 10012 confirmed New York City. Inside was a handsome wooden carving, maybe 6 inches high and 3 inches wide, that I recognized immediately to be a rare Coptic devotional plaque of the 6th century. The object looked strangely familiar to me, so I went to the museum's photo files and started to flip through the several dozen cards with Coptic art. There I found a wooden plaque that I initially took to be its twin, but with a closer look, it was obvious that the object in the photo and the object on my desk were one and the same. And the card bore these words in capital red letters: missing October 2nd, 1951. The return address now deserved a closer look. This time I recognized it not to be the name R. Egret, but rather the verb regret. And not all by a shaking hand, but rather by a very precise and calculated hand wanting to look old and feeble and anonymous. As for 10 Church Street, a little investigation revealed the post office in that section of Manhattan had a different zip code from the one on the mailer's cancellation mark. This caused me to take the word church not as an address, but rather as a qualifier for the word regret. The act of mailing was clearly an act of repentance. Not long after my mysterious package arrived, we learned that the Johns Hopkins Archaeological Museum received a book mailer from R. Egret, 10 Church Street, the same week as the Walters did. Their mailer contained objects from the same period and region, namely Coptic Egypt, and they too went missing in October 1951. So someone apparently had access to 2 Baltimore museum collections in the fall of 1951. That he or she returned the works after 35 years indicated that knowledge of their origin was never lost. And the Regret Church label, which obviously did not need to be there, indicated remorse, a kind of an apology. And the simultaneity of the 2 mailers suggested that someone was at last setting things right. This all made sense to me, since someone with security access to those 2 museum collections in 1951 likely had some seniority. So if one were to assume that person were then at least in their mid-30s, that would make them, him, her, around 70 in 1986. Are you following this?
Yes. Very interesting.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Who was that person? Fast forward now to the spring of last year. Renoir Girl is finally forced to reveal her identity as she presents her legal case as the rightful owner of the flea market Renoir. She is Marcia May Fuqua, then 51, an unmarried driving teacher with a bumpy employment history, from the tiny town of Lovettsville, Virginia. She presents herself as a good faith buyer with no knowledge of art history, but her story quickly unravels. She has forgotten what flea market she visited, and the only likely candidate, the Harper's Ferry Flea Market, had no record of the transaction. And there is Marcia May's mother, Marcia May Fouquet. Different spelling, similar sound. Then 84, who ran an art school for decades out of her home in Great Falls, Virginia, where her daughter was, according to former students, often there to help out. Certainly, daughter Marcia May knew something about art history. But the most interesting part of the daughter's backstory is her mother's backstory. Mom was, in the fall of 1951, a 23-year-old junior in art studies at Goucher. And there was more. Daughter Marcia May's brother, Matt, told Ian Shapira of the Post that their mother had the Renoir in her house for 50 or 60 years, and that it came from a, quote, museum in Baltimore. Matt also claimed that his mother wanted the painting returned to the museum because that would, quote, put this behind us.
Wow.
Mother died at age 85 in September 2013. Matt later stated, when deposed for the civil action, that he had lied about the Renoir. But on January 10th, 2014, the day federal judge Leone Brinkman of the Eastern District of Virginia ruled against Renoir Girl and ordered the painting returned to the BMA, a triumphant and vengeful Matt who hates his sister, opened up to reporters just outside the courthouse, seemingly oblivious to what he had said under oath just a few months earlier. The painting, Matt said, had been in his mother's house since the 1950s. Did she steal it? No, it was a gift. Mom was a beautiful woman, had plenty of boyfriends. And as for the return to the BMA, quote, my mother wanted this. Mother Marcia was living in Baltimore in 1951 at the time of the three thefts and was involved in the art world. And Goucher's campus was then within a few blocks of the Baltimore Museum of Art. That does not, however, put her in the BMA on the evening of November 16th, much less in the Walters or the Johns Hopkins Archaeological Museum a few weeks earlier. A student simply would not have had access to all three local museums during non-public hours. Certainly there is a believable end-of-life, make-it-right flavor to the public appearance of the Renoir in 2012, when Mom must have been aware of her impending death. But what could be a comparable make-it-right moment for her or her family in 1986, when the regret mailers were sent? So while Mother Marcia for sure was not the thief, she probably knew the thief, and now she's dead. So perhaps we'll never know. But there's another intriguing piece that may be part of this puzzle. Again, from 1986. You with me?
Yeah. Every word.
Well, you don't have to get every word. My first major Walters exhibition, Silver Treasure from Early Byzantium, opened in April 1986, 2 weeks before the regret mailer arrived. I was especially eager to borrow a silver bowl in the collection of the Baltimore Museum of Art, but the BMA staff could not locate the bowl. So we had to settle for a photograph in the exhibition. Then on August 1st, 3 months to the day after the regret mailer arrived at the Walters, the BMA silver bowl suddenly turned up. It seems that the museum's registrars had just received a call from a former BMA employee saying that while cleaning out his garage, he opened a cardboard box and in it discovered a tin box containing a silver bowl that he did not recognize. He did, however, recognize the accession number on the tin box as indicating the collection of the BMA, and so he made the call. How did that tin box get into the cardboard box in his garage? The explanation was odd in the extreme, as was the fact that the bowl appeared at the exact moment when it was needed for the deliberations of the International Byzantine Congress, which converged on the Walters that very week to see the Silver Treasure exhibition. He claimed that when he left the BMA in the early 1970s to take a job in Washington, D.C., his successor at the museum packed up his materials and inadvertently included the tin box with the bowl, neither opening it up to check its contents nor recognizing the BMA accession number on the outside. And why did it take 14 years to discover this mistake? Because it was only when this person retired from that job in Washington, D.C., that he had, and this is a quote, time on his hands and cleaned out his garage. What makes this strange story especially compelling in relationship to the events of the fall of 1951 is that the individual in question is familiar to longtime Walters staff members as a skilled art packer whose expertise was welcomed in those years at the Walters as well as the BMA. Not only that, this person died in January 1987, just 6 months after he returned the BMA silver bowl. And we know from the internal records that he had personally transported that silver bowl between the BMA and the Walters in 1951, which suggests that he should have recognized the bowl and the tin box. Finally, and most important, in 1951, he was assistant building superintendent at the BMA, which gave him privileged after-hour access. Then a last tantalizing clue. The regret mailers were sent from the zip code of New York University, which is where this person had done his professional training in the 1950s. Just maybe there was a budding romantic relationship between the rising young superintendent at the BMA, then 35, and the attractive 23-year-old Goucher art student. Baltimore is a small town, and they were both devoting themselves to modern art. It is likely they met. Recall that Brother Matt, when interviewed by reporters outside the courthouse on January 10th, suggested that the Renoir was a gift from one of his mother's many suitors. His girlfriend, Jamie Romantic. That's her name. His girlfriend, Jamie Pole Dancing Romantic, completed his thought with the claim, as if it were family lore, that one of her beaux had worked at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Why steal the Renoir? Undoubtedly, the BMA superintendent had heard the endearing story about that unusually small and sketchy painting in the current exhibition, From Ang to Gauguin, namely, that Renoir dashed it off over lunch for his mistress and soon-to-be wife. Perhaps he, perhaps both of them, knew that that beautiful young woman appears in Renoir's famous boating party at the Phillips in Washington, D.C. Assuming that what I think may be true is true, namely, that the BMA building superintendent of 1951, age 35, and Mr. Egret in 1986, age 71, are one and the same person, I suspect that what drove him to take the Renoir off exhibition after hours on the evening of Friday, November 16th, was the same urge that drove him to steal the Coptic votive from the Walters a few weeks earlier. It was that powerful feeling of connection to people of the past through the objects they created and touched. Add to that, for the painting, the magic of identification. The BM superintendent with Renoir, Marcia with his mistress. Sadie May to Marcia May. This is the stuff of compounded infatuation. Perhaps this was a surprise Christmas gift in 1951. A work of art that, with both a message and a secret, that will bind the two for more than 60 years.